I made this silly website in like 5 minutes, and that's what I'm famous for. But I'm here to talk about my real job today. All right, so Moon to Mars. How do we plan and execute long-term projects? So first, let me talk about, Tanya mentioned I'm a front-end architect at Etsy, and my role there really has a dual purpose. First, I report into our front-end enablement org. You might know that as front-end infrastructure, web platform, product infrastructure. There's a lot of different names for what we do, but basically what we do is we own the technical strategy for our web front-end. So how do we deploy and serve HTML, CSS, JavaScript to users, and we also run our design system, our accessibility team, and our performance team. But also, on top of that, I'm responsible for making sure that we provide a great developer experience for all of our product engineers who are using our platforms to ship features to users every day, with the ultimate goal that we're providing a great experience for our buyers and our sellers on Etsy. Now, in this role, I really often find myself running up against the classic architect's dilemma. How do you plan, execute, and most importantly, get buy-in for large-scope, long-term, cross-team projects when you're a senior IC and you're operating with influence, not authority? This has to be absolutely the hardest part of our job, turning your ideas and your insights into an actual project that teams are going to execute on. Well, over the last year and a half, I've successfully done just this. So I'm here to share with you what I've learned from that process. So this project began about a year and a half ago. Our buyer product engineering group came to us with this really big ask. They needed enablement's help to figure out a technical plan for turning Etsy.com into a progressive web app. Now, if you haven't heard of a PWA or progressive web app before, it's a set of web-based technologies and patterns that help to bridge that gap between the functionality of a website and a native app. PWAs bring really significant improvements to perceived performance, and they bring app-like functionality to the web that are significant drivers of business KPIs. Businesses across all industries have seen major improvements in their business metrics. These are taken from pwastats.com if you're interested in learning more. But Twitter had an increase of 65% in pages per session. Starbucks doubled their daily users. Pinterest had a 60% increase of engagement with their core flow, and Flipkart had a massive 70% increase in conversion rate. So we wanted to get in on this, right? There's a lot of potential in PWA technology. Now, I don't want to get too into the weeds technically of how PWAs work, but it's going to be useful while I talk about the project to understand this common pattern called an app shell. So in an app shell model, you ship a service worker JavaScript file to a user's web browser. That then acts as like a proxy layer in between the web client and your servers. So when the user hits the site, we install the service worker. The service worker makes a request for what's called an app shell. So it's usually like a static wrapper around your content, probably your header and your footer, and all of the HTML that is like the bare bones structure of your website. Then the next time the user navigates to a page, that header comes out of the cache immediately and renders to users. So it really has that like improvement in perceived performance you can kind of see in the little video. All right, so we put together a working group. We started looking at how on earth are we going to actually do this. And we came up against the other classic architectural dilemma. Do you rebuild or do you refactor? Someone's nodding, yeah. Either we could do what Pinterest did and create a brand new PWA platform, rewrite the whole thing from the ground up that would run in tandem with our existing code base where engineers are building features, running experiments all day long, or we could take our existing web platform and refactor it so that we can layer PWA technology and practices on top of it using that app shell pattern. Now, option A potentially was going to get us out in front of users a lot faster if we shipped a very reduced feature set. But it was really high risk. What if the new platform fails, right? And I had really serious concerns about the long-term implications of maintaining N+1 platforms, because that becomes a maintenance and interoperability nightmare really, really quickly. We learned that lesson in the old m.site days, right? Option B, on the other hand, had a significantly longer time scale, because in order to move forward, we'd have to tackle 12 years of front-end tech debt. we had particularly our jQuery-based, shout out to jQuery, JavaScript. But investing in a refactor of our existing platform would have this benefit of improving the experience for our developers who are already working in it and our users. So I firmly believed that option B was the right path forward, but I knew we had a really long road ahead of us. We'd been already kind of trying to do this work slowly and piecemeal over the last, 4 years in enablement and saying, hey guys, let's do this thing that's going to be slower to market. That's a very hard sell, right? So I needed to figure out how am I going to get buy-in from leadership for taking this path. Well, if you want to know how you plan and execute massive technological projects with multi-decade timelines, you turn to the best, NASA. Now, I've been actually kind of surprised a lot of people don't know that NASA is in the middle right now of planning out how we're going to send humans back to the moon in order to have a base of operations to then send humans onto Mars. Now, where are my Punky Brewster fans at? Like, I grew up in the 80s. I was a Punky Brewster fan. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to go to space camp. This is so cool. They actually, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but they ran a simulation over the weekend. They had to dial it back because there were problems, but we're so close. This is really awesome. So when talking to stakeholders about why I thought that option B was the right call, I started using this metaphor. To get to Mars, first you have to land on the moon. Now, this metaphor worked perfectly because refactoring the site-wide app shell was this really big project in and of itself, just like sending humans to the moon. But it would make the journey to a PWA, aka Mars, a lot easier. So this is a great quote from NASA because it really encapsulates all of the things that we can learn from how NASA is approaching this long project. Sending human explorers 250,000 miles to the moon, then 140 million miles to Mars, requires a bold vision, effective program management, funding for modern systems development and mission operations, and support from our partners across the globe. So I kind of took all of that and everything I've read because I've been geeking out about NASA and reading all their website. There's really 4 key takeaways here that have parallels in how we planned and executed on the long-term vision of the PWA. First, partner with teams outside of your org. NASA is working with global partners and private industry to build shared infrastructure. Second, they're establishing a base of operations on the moon because infrastructure investment now will enable future work. Third, get feedback early and often. Test and measure everything. You can use the laboratory, you can use astronauts, you can use rovers, but make sure you're getting that feedback quickly. And finally, success requires a combination of a bold vision with effective execution. Now, this doesn't come directly from NASA, but I'm going to talk about the role of the architect as a force multiplier. All right, so first, let's dive into partnering with teams outside of your org. Now, especially in my case, where I'm on a platform team and the stuff that we're building is going to be used by product, it's so vitally important that we partner with product to make sure that what we're building is meeting their needs. Here's another great quote from the folks at NASA. The commercial space sector is ready to collaborate with NASA on developing capabilities that align with their business plans and meet NASA's strategic goals, joining in innovative co-investments. I really love that phrase, innovative co-investments. Good partnerships are successful when they are co-investments. When your goals align, you both reap the rewards of working together. This is yet another reason, I think, why the App Shell Refactor project had so much potential. It really was an opportunity for us to have an innovative co-investment between enablement and product, where we could both achieve our goals. On the enablement side, the work would improve the health of our platform, and on the product side, improving performance would improve the health of our business KPIs. Not only that, but we all bring different qualities to the table, right? On the enablement side, we have really deep expertise in our systems. How do they work? How do they interact? Product, on the other hand, brings deep expertise in delivery. And now I say this out of love as an infrastructure person, but delivery is not infrastructure's strongest suit. With love, right? So we needed their help. But conversely, product teams don't always have a complete understanding of everything on the platform and how it all works under the hood because they're so busy shipping features. That's not the goal of the work that they're doing. So bringing us together to work on the project, it's like Wonder Twin powers activate, yay. Together, everyone achieves more. But you're probably sitting there saying, great, Katie, right. But like infra and product are so far apart in my org. How do you even get to the point where a partnership like this is on the table? Well, it starts with what I call crossing the A. So this chart is a little bit of an oversimplification, but in a lot of organizations like mine, infrastructure, platform, enablement teams have a separate reporting structure from product engineering. And really the only place where our org lines meet is in the CTO. What that generally means is that communication goes upwards and back down along org lines. But you can't reasonably expect communication between orgs to go all the way up through the CTO and back down again. So what you need to do as a senior leader is cross the A. You have to enable communication and collaboration directly between, maybe it's infra and product, maybe in your case it's product to product or infra to infra, or cross-functionally between engineering and design. So how do you do that? How do you cross the A? Well, my main tips, first, networking, especially with managers, not just ICs. Especially if you've been somewhere for quite a while and you've gone up the ladder, you probably have a great network of ICs. But the more senior you get, the more your influence needs to extend to managers, because the managers are the ones making the decisions about roadmaps. If there aren't forums for communication between the different functions in your org, you can create them. So myself and Andy Yakomink, an amazing product staff engineer at Etsy, a couple of years ago, we created this monthly meeting. We call it the ProdEng Confab. It has a fun name. People like it. Where product and enablement teams get together and kind of share what they're working on. So it's a forum for enablement to kind of talk about, here's all the things that we're adding to the platform. And we get a signal from product about what their goals are and what things they're working on. If your company has an architecture review process, participate in that. There's no better way to get your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening across multiple orgs at your company than participating in architecture reviews. Another thing, this sounds a little creepy, but lurk in lots of Slack channels. You don't have to read them. You can set alert words for the things that you own, but just having, being able to see what other engineers are talking about is so valuable. And I can't tell you the number of times someone's mentioned a problem and I've been able to raise my hand and say, oh, somebody else is working on that on this other team. You should talk to each other, and magic happens, right? Really, all of this is with one goal in mind. You want to make sure that you're building a reputation for good customer service, right? Because we had invested in crossing the A, building these relationships, being good customer service partners, product engineering came to us first. They didn't start building a PWA on a brand new platform without coming to us. They came to us first, and we were partners, and we could lead the execution in the direction that was better for all of us. All right, insight number 2. Investing in infrastructure today enables work in the future. I've kind of touched on this already, but it was so crucial to our success. Now, I love this quote because it's like a Mad Libs for our approach. NASA is prioritizing investments today in lunar exploration that will support successful human exploration of Mars in the future. So if we just replace out some words, boom. Etsy is prioritizing investments today in app shell adoption that will support successful adoption of PWAs in the future. Mic drop. My work here is done. Thank you, NASA. JK, we're halfway through. All right, so visually, the app shell refactor plan meant this. First, we'd invest in improving our infrastructure by refactoring that global page site wrapper to support the app shell pattern. And then we'd be set up to start using PWAs. And then we all profit, right? Yay! But it actually gets better because this is not an ideal timeline. But the timeline actually looks like this. I knew that if we invested in that initial infrastructure work, that it would be a net positive in and of itself. So instead of having to wait all the way until the very end of the project to profit, we'd be seeing benefits at the end of the first phase too. So by taking the slow route and tackling all of that 12 years worth of tech debt, we'd be improving performance, which improves business metrics. We'd be creating a consistent interface for engineers to interact with our global code, where previously there was like a different architecture on every single page of the site. The cognitive overhead was so high, and we could make that simpler. It would also make future global infrastructure changes way easier to manage because we'd be doing it on one consistent interface. And all of that, plus we'd be building infrastructure that would support app shell caching in the PWA. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but like those goals and those benefits, it's a mix of things that meets product goals and things that meet infrastructure goals, right? Like everything just came together so perfectly with this. So win-win, win-win, win-win-win for everybody. All right, so going back to my original metaphor, to get to Mars, first you have to land on the moon. If you can figure out how to set up your project plan so each major phase not only builds towards the long term, but stands by itself and brings value on its own, then you're far more likely to be successful. And let's be honest, one of the bigger risks with long-term projects is that you get halfway there and priorities change, funding dries up, NASA cancels the mission to Mars. Well, going to the moon because it's valuable on its own, that's not wasted work, right? It's valuable no matter what. It's not lost. All right, third insight, get feedback early and often. This is another great NASA quote. On the moon, we can take reasonable risks while astronauts are just 3 days from home. There, we will prove technologies and mature systems necessary to live and work on another world before embarking on what could be a 2 to 3 year mission to Mars. So what does this mean for us? Well, we started working on that first phase of refactoring the app shell, and we put a lot of effort into making sure we were de-risking later stages by doing extensive tests early and often when the risk of failure is low and the cost isn't as high. So I should note, actually, by testing here, I don't mean code tests like unit testing. I mean actually testing the system by using it in some capacity. Now, there can be a tendency when you have these long projects to kind of plan out your execution like this. You build all the different components of the system as individual phases of work, and then once you have a fully working system, you launch it, you test, and you measure success. The problem with this is that you wait way too long to get feedback on the success of your system. And the longer that you go before getting feedback, the more likely you are to fail. So, the first step towards better execution is to make sure that you're practicing continuous measurement throughout the entire project and even beyond. So what does continuous measurement look like? Well, really it all starts with setting a goal that's measurable. We could have started out with the goal to create and launch the app shell, but the only way that we can be successful and meet this goal is by getting all the way to the end, right? We need something that we can measure at every point in the life cycle. And thankfully, we had a really easy way to reframe our goal. Instead, we said, all right, we're going to improve the baseline performance of our buyer-facing web page. What do I mean by baseline? Well, the app shell is kind of like the bare minimum JavaScript, CSS, HTML that loads on every page. So we're never going to be faster than that. Everything we add for features is always going to make the site a little bit slower. So by improving the baseline, we make every single page a little bit faster. All right, next, we need to figure out how are we going to measure our success. Well, we decided to use Google's Lighthouse performance score to track our progress. Lighthouse is great because it looks at a whole bunch of different perf metrics and then reports this weighted score on a scale of 0 to 100. So we set our target for greater than 90 out of 100, although secretly on the inside I wanted us to target 95. I knew we could do it. We did. And finally, you need to figure out how are you going to measure and track progress against that goal over time. For us, we set up SpeedCurve, which is a third-party performance monitoring service. They continuously measured and tracked our Lighthouse scores for us. They provided graphs. So we had a really easy way to monitor progress. And if at any point during the project that score went above or went below 90, we knew we had to pause work and investigate and come up with a fix. All right, that was step 1. Step 2 towards better execution is making sure that you break the work down into phases that are each testable or shippable in some way on their own. Kind of like a recursive application of that idea that each phase of work is standalone, right? Okay, but Katie, like, come on, shipping and testing every single piece of a system individually is great in theory, but like, what if there are pieces that I can't do that with, right? We ran into this problem with the app shell. Since we're switching out the whole framework, we had to have like full feature parity between the old and the new before we could actually wrap it up and wrap pages up in it and turn it on for users. Well, we can learn again from NASA here. First, you can run tests under simulated conditions in the lab. So this image is divers simulating recovery of the Orion spacecraft after re-entry into the water, right? You don't want to wait until after you launch a rocket into space to make sure that you can safely rescue the astronauts after they land back on Earth. So for us, synthetic testing using Lighthouse and Speed Curve was how we simulated conditions in the lab. You can also send out rovers, like our friend Opportunity. Rovers are a great way to test out the eventual impact of your changes without needing to ship the entire system. So we actually ran experiments where we layered on progressive enhancement and we made the site more mobile friendly with the hypothesis that this is going to help us prove out the value of an eventual PWA. Those weren't actually parts of our system. You know, we layered it on top of what already existed to just say, okay, if we do this, is it going to bring value? And finally, you can do what NASA did just this weekend and run a temporary experiment or a dress rehearsal just to collect data and then turn it off. I think a lot of times there can be a tendency to say, oh, I ran this experiment and I turned it on to 100. But sometimes like turning it on for a little bit, learning, and then turning it off is super valuable. All right, so I'm sure a bunch of you is like, Katie, come on, why all of this measuring and testing? This is so complicated. Like, won't things go faster if you didn't add this extra time onto every single step? Well, really the goal in getting creative and how you can test every phase of work has 3 major benefits. First, you reduce the surface area of future debugging, right? When you ship a lot of changes at once and then you see a regression, it can be really hard to understand what part of the system ultimately is causing the issue. But if you have like your checklist of like, all right, we tested this piece individually, we tested that piece individually, like that narrows down the scope of your initial investigation. One of the biggest risks in long-term projects is that you spend all this time building something that fails. So by testing early and often, you're getting that constant feedback that the entire project is on the right track and that your end goal is not only achievable, but valuable. And finally, all of this investment in time spent building confidence and trust in the work is going to pay off down the line when something inevitably goes wrong. So 6 months into our app shell refactor, we had the whole system, it was built, we were starting to launch experiments, and contrary to all of our expectations, we saw performance and business KPIs getting worse, not better, right? The future of the project was really on the line, and leadership could have easily given up on the plan. But because we had built up that confidence and trust and measured, we knew that, you know, this can't be real. This has to be something weird in how we're doing measurement. They gave us the extra time to keep going and do that deep analysis work. And ultimately, we determined that performance actually did get better. It's just that by making the site faster, we were logging more visits from really slow users who made everything look like it was getting slower, right? So if we hadn't have built up that confidence that we knew we were going to make the site faster, when we made it slower, we could have given up. But option B was a resounding success, and I was right. All right, finally, I want to talk about the consulting architect model. Now, this doesn't come directly from NASA, but I think it's so important that we think about what is our role in big projects like this. We talk about being a force multiplier a lot, but like, what does that really mean? Well, when we were in the early stages of forming this team that's going to execute on the plan and cross-functional, and everybody was figuring out who's going to do what, we laid out the roles and responsibilities for everyone on the team. So my role as the architect was really to set technical direction for the team at that high level and making sure that we were aligned with engineering-wide goals, as well as we were having alignment between the product org and the front-end enablement org. Braden, our tech lead, was responsible for breaking down work, ensuring the team was executing, and then delivering on the product goals. Now, I promise we didn't coordinate the 2 triangle slides. But it's just such a great visual, right? So in reality, my role on the project changed pretty significantly over the course of time. Initially, I was coming in, I was a subject matter expert. I had written the proposal and the plan. So I was really heavily involved in the day-to-day workings of the team. I was making decisions, I wrote a little bit of code, I reviewed PRs, I wrote docs, I was answering questions. But as the other folks on the team started really ramping up in the problem space, they gradually took over more responsibility for being the subject matter experts. And now my involvement is pretty minimal. Like, I mostly just step in if they need my help to unblock some work. But first, I had to make sure that I was teaching them those critical skills that are going to set them up for success on embarking on such a big project with so many far-reaching consequences. First, like Sylvia talked about this morning, I had to teach the more junior engineers how to successfully navigate the ambiguity that's inherent in these long timelines. Like, when you make a plan, you usually know pretty clearly at the beginning what the first steps are, but the longer you go, the less you know in advance. You kind of have to get there and do research and figure it out, and then write more tickets, and then do the work. And that's something that a lot of, particularly product engineers, are not really used to doing. So I had to make sure that I was teaching them along the way, like, how do you navigate this ambiguity of not knowing or having someone hand you the work, right? I also had to help them understand when and why you would change your plans away from the original one, and how to coordinate with a lot of teams who are doing interrelated work. Now, this touched every single page on the buyer side, so we had to make sure that we weren't like stepping on anyone else's toes. And that was, a new experience for a lot of those engineers. I also had to help them think about trade-offs more deeply in both the long term and the short term, right? Sometimes you make trade-off decisions because you want to achieve something in the short term. Other times you make a trade-off in the short term and you do something slower because it matters more in the long term. So I had to really help them figure out, like, how do you think about trade-offs and how do you decide based on those? And finally, using data to drive decision-making, especially when it comes to web performance. Like, I love web performance. It is confusing. There's a million different metrics. It's really hard to understand. So I had to teach the team. I had to level them up in understanding what the data is showing them and what the data is telling them. Then, once you've leveled up the team, the most important thing to do is to step back so that the team can step forward. We've now moved on to the second major phase. We're starting to use PWA technologies. And Braden, the tech lead, actually proposed and implemented a completely different way to do caching than what I had originally proposed. He's a subject matter expert. I trust them, right? I trust them that they're going to make good decisions, that they're going to tell me what's going on, and that they're going to come to me when they really, truly need help. Because they're the SMEs now, not me. All right, so to sum up, how do you get to Mars? How do you successfully plan and execute on massive long-term projects? Well, first, cross the A. Make sure that you're building up those relationships and communication channels across reporting lines so that you develop a reputation for good customer service and good partnership. Second, to get to Mars, first, you have to land on the moon. Break down work so that each phase not only enables the next one, but that it provides value on its own. When you have a really long timeline that's really uncertain, you want to make sure that none of the work that you're doing is throwaway, because org priorities change. That's the reality. Third, use continuous testing and measurement to build trust and confidence in your long-term goals. And this is going to save your butt when things inevitably go wrong, because they always do, right? And finally, your job as a technical leader, it's not just to say it depends, but it's to step back so that the team can step forward. And I want to give a huge thanks to this amazing team of folks who are working on the PWA project at Etsy. Without them, this project never would have been a success, and I'm so excited to see all of them take us to Mars in the future. It's coming soon. I can't wait. And thank you.